Hello, my dear viewers. I'm Olga Demchuk, a researcher of the inner world of personality. Today, I would like to talk with you once again about anger. This topic is fundamental when it comes to defining boundaries and understanding who I am. When we get angry about something, most often we say, I am angry at you. Let's try to write down this phrase, I am angry at you, and next to it, write the phrase, I am angry. When we introduce a second object at you, it is as if our psyche shifts the responsibility for the emotions generated within us away from ourselves. In order to better understand the personality, we need to learn to think without involving other people or external circumstances. Here I am, and here I begin to emit certain emotions. Today, look at the props. We have a 3-liter jar and some cats. We'll start by using the white cat. A person exists within their own world. Oh, what a cool echo. Inside the jar, inside their own subjectivity. And they don't realize that their world is quite limited. They don't understand what it's like to interact with the world from inside the jar, or what it's like to interact with the world while being aware of their jar, but not from within it. People who have issues with boundaries are those who are stuck at earlier stages of development. They lack the understanding that their emotions are their own product, a result of their own life activity. In other words, when a person starts to get angry, they are actually filling the jar from the inside with a poisonous fog. They generate it themselves. They are the author, the creator, for example, of their anger. They fill their inner space with anger, yet at the same time, they do not in any way associate themselves with the source of that anger. That is, it seems to them that their anger is a result of the influence of the external world, as if it has been brought in from outside. And if I attribute the authorship of my anger to the outside world, then accordingly, in order to improve the atmosphere inside the jar, I somehow need to affect these external objects or subjects so that I can feel better inside. So if the anger is not mine, but it is poisoning me, then you need to do something with yourself so that I stop producing it and poisoning myself. At this point, many people feel indignant. How can this be my anger? They pushed me to it. They did something. This is just such a wrong world. That's why I suggest we conduct an experiment. Let's imagine that each person was given their own planet. So everyone has their own planet. All the planets are identical. And a person living alone, in complete solitude on this planet, will still experience certain emotions. If we take, for example, two people, person number 1 and person number 2, their levels of anger will be different. That is, a planet where there are no other people, a planet that belongs only to me. But if I remain fixated on myself, focusing only on my own perspective, and continue to have expectations of the world as an environment, I will inevitably be angry at the world for not matching what I desire or hope for. In other words, a person who is more self-centered, who insists that things must be exactly as they want, will experience more anger or suffering. To suffer and be angry, to be angry and to suffer. A person who is simply unable to take ownership of their own emotions is constantly forced to depend on the external world. That is, they seem to be focused on the outside world, but from a consumer's perspective trying to shape it through their own influence to fit their needs. This is also one of the traps. In addition to the inability to claim one's emotions, when I seem to be focused on the external world, wanting to please others, in reality, I am doing all of this for myself to create a certain environment in which I want to live. Let's return to the kitten in the jar. So our kitten starts to get angry. Let's imagine it as a black kitten now. This kitten here isn't angry, but this is the same kitten, just the angry one. And at the moment when it expresses its anger, it gets the impression that the outside world is shaking its jar like this, so to speak. And the kitten doesn't realize that it is actually the one releasing these emotions from within itself. It seems to him that it's the outside world tossing him around, shaking him, storming him, and he feels completely powerless over what's happening. But in reality, our kitten isn't in control. Let's gently set him down for now. He isn't in control of his own emotions. What matters is what's happening outside. Don't just sit there, kitten. What matters is what's happening outside. But how we respond depends only on us. Let's imagine together that the neighbors of this kitten have a baby crying behind the wall. The child is sick, the mother is caring, but the child is in pain and cries. And this kitten hears the crying. This crying bursts into his space and makes his environment different from how he would like it to be. It's not just this kitten, each of us, when things don't go the way we want, in that moment we become vulnerable. And this vulnerability can turn into a sense of being wounded. That's when I start to suffer from the baby's crying, or get angry at the baby's crying. This release of emotions, letting them spill out, is a habit that stems from our own infancy. Because when we were little, lying in our cradles, all we could do was either suffer or get angry. That was the only action available to us. So, in fact, our little black kitten shrinks in size from the baby's crying. And this shrinking is connected to the fact that this space used to belong only to him in his own apartment, but the baby's crying, bursting out, seems to steal the space that once belonged to him. That's why there's a feeling that I am shrinking, but the moment I start to get angry, I immediately grow in size. In other words, our anger is a way of compensating for our sense of smallness. When we get angry at something, it's as if we are exerting influence over it. In other words, to be angry is to want to destroy, annihilate, wipe out, erase something from the face of the earth. So, in effect, this crying baby behind the wall is inside the jar of this cat, even though in reality that's not the case. The cat pulls the baby into the jar because by reacting emotionally to the baby and attributing the cause of its emotions to it, the cat begins to live together with the baby, and the baby becomes the reason and source of these emotions. Why am I using a baby as an example? Because a baby truly cannot stop crying, and there's nothing it can do about itself. And a person with a habit of getting angry, with a habit of anger, will get equally angry at a baby, at a chair, at loved ones, and so on. In other words, the amount of anger that a person generates is constant. The habit of getting angry is precisely a habit from childhood away to quickly compensate for the sense of inadequacy you found yourself in. Many people spend most of their energy and time on these two processes, suffering and getting angry. I either suffer because of this, or I get angry about it. People who suffer are even more trapped than those who get angry. Those who get angry at least have some understanding of what they want. Although even wanting is not guaranteed. For example, I get angry when someone appears who is better than me in some competitive aspect. I get angry, and with this anger, I try to annihilate or belittle them. I devalue them, make them seem smaller in order to make myself feel bigger. This infantile habit of suffering or getting angry blocks a person's ability to take action. Let's return to those people we mentioned who are scattered across different planets. A person who suffers or gets angry about certain external circumstances is already spending their energy on that. They have no energy left to change anything or to take any action. He cannot accept external reality as it is, nor can he recognize his limited ability to influence it. That's just the way things are. How can I at least make a small improvement? In other words, getting angry or suffering, being upset about something or suffering because of it, is considered by an unevolved personality, or when I regress to earlier stages of development under stress, a sufficient action. Essentially, the whole world is being dragged inside the jar. Even an infant is pulled into the jar, and people interact with the child as if it were their own, simply because they assign it as the source of their own emotions. It's easier with adults, because very few people are willing to admit that crying babies irritate them. Some people do get angry, but they say, no, I'm not angry. Let's look at close ones. A loved one whom we have pulled in solely to explain to ourselves the origin of these emotions. This habit of reacting with anger or pain to what happens, rather than understanding the danger it poses. When we feed the habit of getting angry, we will attack ourselves with the same aggression and hatred. People who get angry and lash out at others with their poison do exactly the same to themselves. In other words, this is an uncompleted stage of evolution when you realize that this world is not your placenta, not your womb that must conform to you. You have certain opportunities to influence this world. This is about owning your anger and suffering, because some people simply cannot admit to it at all. In other words, these are even more deeply trapped individuals. The most trapped are those who do not acknowledge pain and suffering at all. Then, a person may admit to pain and suffering, but not to aggression, because when they refuse to recognize their own aggression, they always appear to be the white kitten, never the black one. He is always the white kitten, and all of his aggression, he believes, is not really his. People who do not acknowledge their own aggression are dangerous, because they become passive-aggressive and constantly cast you as the tormentor. So, now we are at the point where we recognize our own aggression, we understand that it is our own creation, and we no longer shift responsibility for our aggression onto someone else. And if a person understands that this is their own aggression, then they realize that it stems from the world not matching how they want things to be. At that point, I reach another crossroads. I try to figure out whether I can do something about it right now or not. Those who do not acknowledge their aggression are forced to wear a hair shirt, a kind of straitjacket. There is a video about this on the channel. The straitjacket, in other words, they never question their emotions, and so they constantly have to restrain them. Many people describe how they wake up in the morning feeling relaxed and happy, and then it's as if something starts to tighten around them. This is when the straitjacket is put on their emotions that can only be suppressed. That is, it's impossible for them to process or integrate these emotions. They can only hold them back. People like this are very tense, their bodies are tense, and they feel constrained when interacting with others. There is a constant sense that you're in this straitjacket, experiencing pain whenever you communicate with other people. This pain is the suppressed anger that should have been released. In other words, constantly nurturing anger and saying that it's right to be angry and to let that anger out is essentially locking yourself into the mindset of an infant who can only respond to the outside world with crying and anger, reacting emotionally. This is self-aggression. It is a form of self-hatred. Anger is an unrealized action. It is a refusal to accept your true size and to come to terms with the fact that this is all you are able to do. But when a person begins to think, at least becoming aware that they are inside a jar and that the world is not obligated to be a favorable water poured into that jar, they realize, this is my jar. Here, I wanted the temperature to be a certain way, but the world has its own temperature. In other words, this is a person who has taken ownership of this jar. They understand that their emotions are simply a reaction to things not going their way. They have claimed these emotions as their own and are processing them. And then they are left with the energy and the mental capacity to take certain actions, to make decisions, to analyze themselves, to analyze the world, and to understand what they can do in this situation. People who do not take ownership of their aggression are, as the saying goes, completely weather dependent. They are entirely dependent on external factors. They are constantly overwhelmed by their own emotionality. And when their emotionality becomes effective, the person can no longer think they are flooded. In addition, a person who has acted out their aggression always ends up tormented by a sense of guilt, because being a beast is dangerous for our survival. This feeling of guilt over one's aggression and the constant attempts to justify it as righteous and justified are also exhausting. To socialize, we need to be humane. Aggressiveness is animalistic. It comes from the earliest stages of development. I hope I have convinced you to explore your anger. Let me remind you, I see my book is lying here. This book is available in Russian, Ukrainian, and English. So on the website olgademchuk.org, you can find all the information. I invite anyone who is interested to purchase my work. And just a reminder, if you find these ideas helpful, give the video a like and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss new episodes. We appreciate your feedback, so share your thoughts in the comments. Perhaps you have something to add to my video. Or you can share examples of times when you were able to own your anger, to realize that it's not that I'm angry at you, but rather that I am simply feeling anger myself, and how that helped you find a way out or a solution to a difficult situation. See you next time.